The weight of the crown, they say, is immense, but few truly understand the burden until it rests squarely on their head. For King Charles, that weight wasn't just tradition, duty, and the expectations of a nation. It was also the creeping unease, the nagging feeling that something was amiss within the very heart of the House of Windsor, a feeling that would soon morph into a chilling realization. The story doesn't begin with a bang, but with a whisper, a hushed conversation, a discreet message delivered through channels so secure they were practically invisible. It was a summons, not for tea and polite conversation, but for something far more grave, a sealed intelligence briefing marked with a classification that cut through the usual palace decorum, immediate royal security risk. Imagine the scene. King Charles, a man who had waited his entire life for this moment, now faced with a threat unlike any he had anticipated. Not a foreign power, not a political scandal, but something far more insidious, festering within his own family. The briefing originated from Kensington Palace, home to Prince William, Princess Catherine, and their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and its subject, Meghan Markle. Not Meghan the Duchess, the celebrity, the outspoken critic, but Meghan the strategist, the alleged architect of a plan so audacious, so meticulously crafted, that it threatened the very foundations of the monarchy. The briefing painted a picture far removed from the narrative of victimhood and misunderstood intentions that had dominated the headlines for years. This was a different beast altogether. The intelligence suggested a long-term operation, quietly unfolding for months, perhaps even years. An operation focused not on settling old scores or airing grievances, but on influencing the future. And the target wasn't Charles himself, but the next generation, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, the future of the monarchy. For a man who had dedicated his life to preserving the crown, the implications were staggering. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family squabbles. This was about the survival of an institution. The briefing detailed surveillance patterns, behavioral observations, and long-term access planning, all meticulously documented. It spoke of informants within royal circles, individuals close enough to gather sensitive information, people whose betrayal cut deep. What troubled Charles most was the timing. The plans were aligned with future succession milestones, moments when the pressure on William's children would naturally intensify. The goal wasn't immediate interference, but strategic positioning, being present and prepared when influence would matter most. It was a chillingly patient strategy, designed to outlast any individual reign. The briefing alleged that the operation didn't threaten a single individual, nor did it aim solely at damaging reputations. It posed a direct risk to the stability of the monarchy itself. The future line of succession, the integrity of the royal household, and the quiet protections that had always surrounded the next generation were all drawn into question. Charles listened intently, his expression controlled, but those closest to him could sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. This wasn't anger, but a cold, hard realization. Restraint, his usual instinct, might no longer be an option. The rules had changed, and so had the stakes. When the briefing concluded, the silence was deafening. Then Charles spoke, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. He wanted full access to everything, every document, every detail, unfiltered and unredacted. No one, no matter how sensitive their connection, would decide what he was allowed to see. The gloves were off, the game had changed, and the battle for the future of the monarchy had begun. The floodgates opened. What had been a trickle of carefully curated information became a torrent of unfiltered data. King Charles, armed with the full picture, saw the pieces of the puzzle click into place with chilling clarity. It wasn't just about a flash drive discovered at Kensington Palace. It was about connecting seemingly random events into a cohesive, calculated strategy. Meghan Markle's name surfaced repeatedly, not as an ancillary figure, but as the central architect of the operation. The documents laid bare the scope of her ambition, targeting not the present monarch, but the future, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Each child was dissected, their routines scrutinized, their vulnerabilities assessed. It was cold, methodical, and utterly devoid of sentiment. The operation, as outlined, was unnervingly precise. Royal routines were monitored subtly through patterns, schedules, and informants embedded within the palace's orbit. These weren't outsiders, they were individuals with proximity, people whose access made their involvement all the more treacherous. The timing was impeccable, aligned with future succession milestones. those moments when the pressure on Prince William's children would reach its zenith. This wasn't about immediate disruption, but about strategic positioning, about being ready to exert influence when it mattered most. The realization hit Charles like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an attack on his reign, but on the reigns to come. It was a long game, designed to undermine the monarchy's future stability. For Charles, this was a turning point. The Sussex drama, once viewed as a personal family matter, now morphed into a constitutional crisis. Meghan's alleged involvement, meticulously documented, transcended the boundaries of Prince William's household, striking at the very heart of the crown's continuity. A disturbing pattern emerged. The strategy was predicated on time. It was a slow burn, designed to unfold over years, patiently waiting for moments of transition and vulnerability. The most chilling revelation: the operation was designed to continue regardless of who sat on the throne. It didn't require Charles's presence or approval. It anticipated his absence. Delay, once a tool for stability, now presented a grave risk. Each day of inaction allowed the strategy to burrow deeper, closer to its intended target. Charles no longer saw this as information to be weighed at leisure. He saw it as a countdown already in motion, demanding immediate and decisive action. Events that had once seemed isolated or emotionally driven now coalesced into a disturbing pattern. Disputes involving the Sussexes, previously dismissed as personal grievances, now appeared as deliberate steps, carefully orchestrated long before their true purpose was revealed. The relentless media pressure, the cycles of outrage and victimhood, were all part of a calculated strategy to test responses, gauge public sentiment, and identify weaknesses in the palace's defenses. Even the periods of quiet took on a sinister new meaning. What had been interpreted as withdrawal or disengagement now appeared as strategic silence, used to reset public attention and allow pressure to build elsewhere. Each pause was an opportunity for planning, for alignment with future milestones, for the careful positioning that had now come into sharp focus. Charles learned of Catherine's growing unease months earlier, when subtle irregularities began to surface around the children. Questions asked too precisely at school events. Familiar routines noticed by unfamiliar faces. Catherine, acting on instinct, had sought outside guidance, leading to an investigation connected to individuals with MI5-linked security expertise. The findings were troubling, confirming that information about the Wales children was being gathered in ways that transcended mere coincidence. It was a coordinated effort, a dangerous line being crossed. The operation was layered and adaptive, designed to function even when parts of it were exposed. Different strands operated independently, all converging toward the same long-term objective. Charles felt a profound shift in his understanding. The years of strain within the family were no longer just emotional conflicts. They were elements of a broader effort that relied on time, distraction, and misinterpretation. Nothing was spontaneous. Nothing was driven by impulse alone. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, and treating it as anything less had only allowed it to flourish. The room had transformed. No longer a space for quiet contemplation, it buzzed with the grim efficiency of a war room. Senior advisors, security experts, constitutional lawyers all spoke with a chilling urgency. The situation had escalated beyond a mere family squabble. It was now a matter of national security. The message was stark. This had crossed out of domestic territory and into the realm of threats against the crown. The structure of the plan, its timing, its long-range focus, made it uniquely dangerous to the monarchy itself. Future kings were not merely being discussed in theory, they were being quietly prepared for, positioned as points of leverage. Influence, once embedded early and patiently, could reshape loyalty, perception, and authority years later without a single public confrontation. The threat lay not in explosive headlines, but in relentless persistence. Internal division, they cautioned, was the most potent weapon against any institution. The operation, attributed to Meghan Markle, didn't rely on direct assaults against the crown. Instead, it worked by creating fractures between generations, between duty and emotion, between public role and private identity. Left unchecked, it could weaken the monarchy from within, leaving future reigns vulnerable before they even began. The most sobering warnings centered on the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis were not simply symbols of continuity. They were human beings growing up under extraordinary pressure. Any attempt to observe, study, or influence them outside the protective boundaries of the royal household exposed them to manipulation at a time when they were least equipped to recognize it. Safeguarding the children, advisors stressed, was inseparable from safeguarding the crown. Choosing silence now would not preserve peace. It would set a dangerous precedent, signaling that the monarchy could be pressured into inaction, even when its core responsibilities were under threat. The weight of history pressed down on Charles. Monarchs, he knew, were judged not by their intentions, but by what they allowed. Protecting family quietly had always been an instinctive response, a way to limit damage and avoid escalation. But this moment demanded something different. The crown existed not to shield itself from discomfort, but to endure. The personal cost was undeniable. Public action would close doors forever, hardening lines that might otherwise blur with time. Yet, retreating into discretion would leave the institution exposed, the next generation unprotected. Charles made his position known. He would not allow the future of the monarchy to be negotiated in silence or shaped by covert agendas. The crown would not hide, hesitate, or apologize for defending itself. Duty outweighed blood. Authority trumped comfort. Responsibility eclipsed restraint. A path was chosen. A Rubicon crossed. The shift was immediate. The atmosphere within the palace crackled with purpose. Senior aides understood that the matter was no longer theoretical. The king had decided, and his decision carried the weight of centuries. Charles authorized a coordinated response, moving on multiple fronts simultaneously. Legal advisors prepared actions that would operate across jurisdictions in the UK and in California. These were not symbolic gestures. They were carefully structured measures designed to halt any ongoing activity, prevent future attempts at access, and establish firm boundaries. Containment first, consequences second. Intelligence and security channels were activated discreetly but decisively. Individuals connected to the information flow were identified, reviewed, flagged. There was no room for delay, no tolerance for ambiguity. The operation attributed to Meghan Markle was reclassified, placed under a category reserved for threats requiring absolute discretion and full institutional cooperation. A historic turning point. What made the king's response so striking was its restraint. No leaks, no briefings to friendly outlets, no attempt to manipulate public sympathy. Charles understood that public noise would only provide cover for countermoves. Silence was control. Every instruction moved through private channels, documented meticulously, executed without fanfare. Those involved described it as the most disciplined intervention they had ever witnessed. Prince Harry's position was addressed with equal clarity. He was no longer viewed through the prism of family reconciliation or emotional complexity. In internal discussions authorized by the king, Harry became a variable, an unpredictable factor whose choices could either limit damage or deepen it. The palace no longer planned around his sensitivities. It planned around risk. Advisors acknowledged that this approach would permanently alter relations. There would be no return to informal understanding, no quiet resetting of boundaries after time passed. Charles accepted this fully. Protecting the crown meant accepting losses that could not be measured publicly. The monarchy had survived for centuries, not by avoiding hard decisions, but by making them when hesitation became dangerous. His instructions were final. No trial measures, no phased responses, no wait-and-see options. Every order assumed full follow-through. Every safeguard anticipated resistance. Charles was not reacting emotionally. He was deliberately sealing doors, knowing they would never reopen. As the machinery of law, security, and institutional authority moved into place, one truth became undeniable. Meghan Markle's strategy had been built on patience and time. The king's response was built on certainty, and certainty, once exercised at this level, leaves no room for reversal. Those tasked with carrying out the king's will understood they were witnessing something rare. A monarch acting not out of anger or pride, but out of obligation to a future he would not live to see. The crown had moved silently and decisively, and the consequences were already unfolding, long before the outside world realized that a line had been crossed and sealed forever.